In the vast, cold expanse of the Quantum Dominion's Galactic Council headquarters, silence reigned supreme. Zorn Vex, senior diplomatic attaché to Supreme Leader Dratha, stood perfectly still, his three-fingered hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the immaculate Grand Hall. The fog machines were working at optimal capacity today, creating the perfect atmosphere of mystique and dread that had served the Dominion for 10,000 cycles. The ominous music, a composition specifically designed by the Dominion's foremost sound engineers to create feelings of inadequacy and submission, pulsed at precisely the right decibel level. Everything was in order. Everything was perfect. Everything was as it had been for millennia. And that was exactly how Zorn liked it. His silvery skin reflected the dim, reddish lighting as he moved through the hall, inspecting each ceremonial banner and each ornamental weapon with meticulous care. The Supreme Leader would be addressing the Assembly later that day, and protocol demanded absolute perfection. Zorn had spent his entire life, 342 cycles, dedicated to the preservation and execution of Dominion protocol. It was not merely his job, it was his calling. "Senior Attaché Vex," a voice called from behind him. Zorn turned, his movements precise and economical. "Captain Morza, report." The younger officer bowed at exactly the prescribed angle, 30 degrees. No more, no less. "All security measures are in place for the Supreme Leader's address. The Assembly delegates from all 2,000 subjugated worlds have been processed and assigned their positions according to hierarchical standing." "Excellent. And the new intelligence regarding the recently discovered planet?" "Earth, I believe it's called." Captain Morse's expression flickered slightly, betraying a momentary hesitation that would have been imperceptible to anyone less observant than Zorn. "Initial reports are perplexing. Senior Attaché. The species appears technologically inferior, yet they have achieved faster-than-light travel. Their social structure is chaotic, with no clear hierarchical system. They call it democracy." Zorn sniffed disdainfully. "Another barbaric system that will be properly restructured once they are formally incorporated into the Dominion. Has the standard intimidation package been prepared for their eventual diplomatic reception?" "Yes. Senior Attaché. Triple fog machines. Enhanced bass frequencies for the Supreme Leader's voice modulation. And the Hall of Conquered Worlds has been updated to include a placeholder for Earth artifacts." "Very good. I anticipate we will not need to concern ourselves with these humans for some time. Our scouts indicate they are at least 5 cycles away from..." An alarm blared, cutting through the ominous background music with a harsh, insistent wailing. Red emergency lights began to pulse, casting strange shadows through the ceremonial fog. Zorn's communicator crackled to life. "Security breach in Docking Bay 7. Unidentified vessel has bypassed outer defenses." "Impossible," Zorn hissed, already moving toward the security terminal embedded in the wall. "No unauthorized chip has penetrated Dominion defenses in 8,000 cycles." The terminal's screen flickered to life, showing a small, battered vessel of unfamiliar design now settled in Docking Bay 7. The ship appeared almost primitive. Its hull was patched in places, its design inelegant and clearly built for function rather than intimidation or aesthetics. "Magnify," Zorn ordered, and the image zoomed in on the vessel's side where crude characters were painted. "Earth diplomatic vessel, Serendipity." "Earth?" Captain Morza whispered, forgetting protocol in his shock. "But how did they find us so quickly? How did they penetrate our defenses?" Zorn was already moving, his long legs carrying him swiftly toward the docking bay. "Alert all security personnel, but do not engage without my direct order. And someone turn off that alarm. It's disrupting the ambient dread." By the time Zorn reached Docking Bay 7, a small crowd of Dominion security officers had already formed a semicircle around the Earth vessel, their plasma rifles raised. The ship's airlock remained closed. "Report," Zorn demanded of the security chief. The vessel bypassed 3 security checkpoints, the officer replied, disbelief evident in his voice. They responded to hails but ignored all protocols, refused to submit identification sequences, and somehow the defense systems just let them through. That's impossible. The defense systems are programmed to... The airlock of the Earthship hissed open, releasing a small cloud of steam. The security officers tensed, plasma rifles humming as they charged to full capacity. A figure appeared in the doorway, bipedal, not dissimilar to Dominion physiology, but smaller, softer looking, with only 2 eyes instead of the standard 3 or 4 of most civilized species. It was draped in a casual blue uniform that lacked any of the intimidation spikes or rank manifestation common throughout the galaxy. And it was smiling. "Howdy," the creature called out cheerfully, completely ignoring the weapons trained on it. "Captain Jake Brenner of Earth. Sorry about the unexpected visit, but your defense grid guys were super helpful when we told them we had an appointment." The human stepped forward, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "Is this where we check in? Your security folks at Checkpoint 2 said something about protocol. But honestly, we couldn't make heads or tails of those forms. 17 appendages for a signature seems excessive, don't you think?" Zorn's third eye twitched, a sign of extreme stress he hadn't experienced since the ritual of ascension went awry 90 cycles ago. "You bypassed our security by claiming to have an appointment?" "Well, yeah." Captain Brenner shrugged. "We do now, right? I mean, we're here. You're here. Seems like an appointment to me." 2 more humans emerged from the ship, one slightly taller with darker skin, the other shorter and stockier. "Captain Brenner," the taller one said. "Perhaps we should introduce ourselves properly. These beings clearly value formality." This human turned to Zorn and gave a slight bow. "I am Dr. Priyakumar, Cultural Liaison for Earth's First Contact Division. And this," gesturing to the stockier human, "is Lieutenant Miguel Sanchez, our morale officer." "Morale officer?" Zorn couldn't help but ask. Lieutenant Sanchez grinned widely. "I tell jokes and bring booze to diplomatic functions. Speaking of which," he held up a dark bottle. "Anyone interested in a proper Earth greeting? We brought whiskey." Zorn felt his carefully ordered world beginning to tilt. No species, in all his centuries of diplomatic service, had ever arrived unannounced, bypassed security through casual conversation, or offered intoxicants as a greeting. "You will all be detained for processing and interrogation," Zorn declared. Regaining his composure, "Your vessel will be impounded, and—" "Yeah, about that," Captain Brenner interrupted, still smiling. "We're actually on a pretty tight schedule. We were hoping for a quick tour, maybe a chat with whoever's in charge, and then we need to head back. Got a poker game on Thursday we can't miss." "A poker game?" Zorn's mind reeled. These creatures had somehow found the most heavily guarded location in the galaxy, penetrated its defenses, and were now concerned about a game? "This is unprecedented," Zorn said stiffly. "No unauthorized delegation has ever—" "Look," Captain Brenner said, his smile never wavering. "We can stand here arguing protocol all day, or we can get on with it. We come in peace. We're interested in cultural exchange, and frankly, we're curious about all—" He gestured vaguely at the grand hall visible beyond the docking bay. The fog machines are a nice touch. By the way, very dramatic." Zorn felt a headache forming at the base of his central eye. "You will follow me," he finally said, seeing no alternative that wouldn't create an incident. "Any deviation from the prescribed path will result in immediate disintegration." "Sounds fair." Captain Brenner nodded, completely unperturbed by the threat. "Lead the way, Mr. Senior Diplomatic Attaché Zorn Vex," he replied automatically, then immediately regretted providing his name to these barbarians. "Great to meet you, Zorn," Captain Brenner said, extending a hand. When Zorn merely stared at it, the human withdrew it with a shrug. Right. Different customs. My bad. Shall we? As Zorn led the humans through the grand corridors of the Galactic Council headquarters, he became increasingly bewildered by their behavior. Rather than being appropriately awed and intimidated by the massive architecture, the ancient weapons of subjugated civilizations displayed on the walls, or the periodic holographic displays of Supreme Leader Drathar's conquest highlights, the humans seemed amused. So, how long have you guys been doing the whole Galactic Dominion thing? Lieutenant Sanchez asked, pausing to examine a particularly gruesome torture device from the Naborian Rebellion. The Quantum Dominion has ruled this galaxy for 10,000 cycles, Zorn replied stiffly. Every world within 100 light-years has submitted to our authority or been cleansed. Captain Brenner mused. Not bad. We've only been doing the whole space travel thing for about a century. Got lucky with some wormhole tech we stumbled across. Pretty primitive compared to all this, I guess. He gestured at a passing guard's plasma rifle. Though I gotta say, we probably would have gone with less spikes on the uniforms. Seems like a safety hazard, you know? Dr. Priyakumar had stopped to study a large mural depicting Supreme Leader Drathar standing triumphantly atop a mountain of fallen enemies. Fascinating artistic style, she commented, reminiscent of Earth's Soviet propaganda, but with elements of Renaissance portraiture. The artist clearly wanted to emphasize the leader's third eye as a symbol of omniscience. Zorn felt strangely compelled to respond. The Supreme Leader's central eye is said to see the future itself. All who gaze upon it must immediately prostrate themselves or risk having their molecular structure unraveled. Neat party trick, Lieutenant Sanchez chuckled. Does he do children's birthday parties too? A nearby guard gasped audibly at the sacrilege, but Zorn quickly signaled him to stand down. The Supreme Leader is not to be mocked, he said severely. Such disrespect would normally result in execution, but as you are ignorant of our ways, I will overlook it. Once. Appreciate that. Captain Brenner nodded, not looking particularly concerned. So, where are we headed? Throne room? Reception hall? Cafeteria? I'm starving. We are proceeding to the processing chamber, where you will be properly documented before your inevitable audience with... Zorn stopped abruptly as he realized the humans were no longer following him. Turning back, he found them peering down a restricted corridor. Hey, what's down here? Captain Brenner called out, already starting to wander in that direction. That area is forbidden, Zorn snapped, hurrying back. It contains the Dominion's archives and is restricted to all but the highest-ranking officials. Archives? Dr. Priyakumar's eyes lit up. Historical records? Oh, we absolutely must see those. Cultural exchange, remember? Before Zorn could stop them, the three humans had already turned down the corridor, moving with infuriating casualness as if they were tourists rather than potential prisoners of the most feared empire in galactic history. Return immediately, Zorn commanded, hurrying after them. Guard, secure that corridor. But the humans moved surprisingly quickly for such seemingly soft creatures. By the time Zorn and two guards caught up with them, they had already entered the vast archive chamber. A cathedral-like space filled with towering data crystals and ancient artifacts from 10,000 cycles of conquest. Whoa, Lieutenant Sanchez whispered, genuinely impressed for the first time. Now this is cool. Captain Brenner had already made himself comfortable, leaning against a sacred pillar that contained the complete genetic record of 17 extinct species. So this is where you keep all the good stuff, huh? Got any Earth info yet? Or are we too new? Zorn was practically vibrating with outrage. You are in direct violation of 37 Dominion protocols. Remove yourselves from that sacred archive immediately, or... Is that a flash drive? Dr. Priyakumar interrupted, pointing at a small crystalline object in a display case. It looks remarkably similar to our early data storage devices. That, Zorn said through gritted teeth, is the quantum key of the Berbelian Empire, a civilization we conquered 7,000 cycles ago. It contains the complete consciousness of their ruling class, preserved as a warning to those who would defy the Dominion. Huh, Captain Brenner said, leaning in to look at it. Looks like a USB stick with fancy lighting. Does it come in different colors? One of the guards made a strangled noise of disbelief, and Zorn felt his patience reaching its absolute limit. You will return to the main corridor immediately, or I will have no choice but to... An alarm suddenly blared throughout the facility, drowning out his threat. The humans didn't seem concerned. If anything, they looked intrigued. What's that? Lieutenant Sanchez asked, raising his voice above the alarm. A junior officer came running into the archive chamber, skidding to a halt when he saw the humans. Senior Attaché, the Supreme Leader has arrived for his address to the Assembly 3 hours ahead of schedule. All diplomatic personnel are ordered to the Grand Audience Chamber immediately. Zorn felt the blood drain from his face. The Supreme Leader? Early? In 10,000 cycles. Supreme Leader Drathar had never once deviated from the official schedule. And now these humans were here, wandering freely through restricted areas, completely ignorant of proper protocol. We need to get you out of here, Zorn said urgently to the humans. If the Supreme Leader discovers unauthorized beings in the headquarters, especially in the archives. Perfect timing, Captain Brenner exclaimed. We'd love to meet the big boss. Lead the way. No, Zorn hissed. You don't understand. The Supreme Leader does not grant audiences to unprocessed delegations. There are rituals, preparations. It takes months of training just to learn the proper prostration technique. Lieutenant Sanchez shrugged. We're quick learners. Besides, sounds like he's expecting diplomats, right? That's us. I must insist, Zorn began, but Captain Brenner was already striding toward the exit. Which way to this Grand Audience Chamber? The human asked cheerfully. Wouldn't want to keep the Supreme Leader waiting, especially if he's early. Must be important. Zorn felt trapped between impossible choices. If he forcibly detained the humans, it could create a diplomatic incident with an unknown species. If he let them approach the Supreme Leader unprepared, well, they would almost certainly be vaporized on the spot, which would also constitute a diplomatic incident. Very well, he said finally, a plan forming in his mind. I will escort you to the observation gallery above the Grand Audience Chamber. You may observe the proceedings from there, unseen, which will give you valuable insight into our customs before any formal introduction. Sounds reasonable? Dr. Priyakumar nodded. Lead the way. Zorni, Lieutenant Sanchez said, clapping Zorn on the back, physical contact that made the attaché flinch involuntarily. As they made their way toward the Grand Audience Chamber, Zorn's mind raced. Once the humans were secured in the observation gallery, he could alert security to quietly detain them after the Supreme Leader's address. They would then be properly processed according to protocol and perhaps, if they were lucky, granted a formal audience in a few months' time. The corridors were now filled with rushing officials and delegates, all hurrying toward the Grand Audience Chamber. The humans attracted curious glances, but everyone was too focused on not being late for the Supreme Leader's unexpected address to question their presence. Quite the rush hour you've got here, Captain Brenner commented, deftly sidestepping a harried-looking delegate from the silicon-based Crystalline Collective. Does your Supreme Leader often cause this kind of panic? The Supreme Leader does not cause panic, Zorn corrected automatically. He inspires appropriate haste in his subjects. And no, schedule changes are unprecedented. They arrived at a small, discreet door set high in the wall above the Grand Audience Chamber. Zorn pressed his hand to the security panel, and the door slid open to reveal a narrow balcony overlooking the vast chamber below. Wait here, Zorn instructed. Observe in silence. I must take my position with the diplomatic corps. I will return for you after the address. Sure thing. Captain Brenner agreed easily. We'll be as quiet as mice. Zorn had no idea what a mice was, but he nodded curtly and left them, hurrying down to take his place in the diplomatic section of the chamber. The massive room was rapidly filling with delegates from across the galaxy, beings of every conceivable shape, size, and biochemical composition, all arranged in perfect hierarchical order according to their world's standing within the Dominion. The fog machines were working overtime, creating a thick, dramatic mist across the floor. The ominous music had been increased to its maximum intimidation frequency. Huge holographic displays showed scenes of Dominion military might, cycling through images of conquered worlds and subjugated species. Zorn took his position just as the first ceremonial horns began to sound, signaling the imminent arrival of Supreme Leader Drathar. The entire assembly immediately prostrated themselves, some flat on the ground, others folding their various appendages in species-appropriate gestures of complete submission. The ceremonial horns grew louder, and the center of the chamber began to glow with an eerie purple light. The Supreme Leader's platform was rising from below, surrounded by crackling energy fields and swirling fog. And then Supreme Leader Drathar appeared, a towering figure in ornate black armor adorned with the bone fragments of particularly troublesome enemies. His 3 regular eyes glowed red, while his central eye, set higher in his forehead, pulsed with an unearthly blue light. His voice, amplified and deepened by technology, echoed throughout the chamber. Rise, subjects of the Dominion, as one. The assembly rose to their secondary position of submission, still bowed, but now able to see the Supreme Leader. I have summoned you before the appointed time because... Is he using a voice modulator? A loud whisper came from the observation gallery, clearly audible in the momentary silence. And what's with all the fog machines? You guys really commit to the aesthetic, huh? The entire assembly froze in horror. Supreme Leader Drathar stopped mid-sentence, his central eye swiveling up toward the observation gallery where, to Zorn's absolute mortification, Captain Brenner was leaning over the railing, completely visible to everyone below. Who dares speak during my address? The Supreme Leader thundered, his central eye flaring brighter. Zorn wished desperately for a spontaneous wormhole to appear and swallow him whole. This was it. His career, possibly his life, was over. These humans had destroyed 10,000 cycles of perfect protocol in less than a day. Sorry, my bad, Captain Brenner called down cheerfully, giving a little wave. Just making an observation. Please, continue. Don't mind us. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. No one interrupted the Supreme Leader. No one apologized so casually. And absolutely no one told him to continue. Supreme Leader Drathar seemed momentarily speechless, his central eye pulsing erratically. Identify yourself, creature, he finally demanded. Captain Jake Brenner of Earth, came the reply. This is Dr. Priyakumar and Lieutenant Sanchez. We're your new neighbors from a few systems over. Thought we'd drop by and say hello. The human turned to his companions. Bit theatrical, isn't it? Reminds me of that haunted house we visited in Tokyo. Several delegates looked as if they might faint. A few were already quietly backing toward the exits, anticipating the inevitable explosion of supreme violence. Supreme Leader, Drathar's voice dropped to a dangerously quiet level, which was somehow more terrifying than his amplified booming. You dare to enter the heart of the Quantum Dominion uninvited? To interrupt my address, to speak of haunted houses? Captain Brenner seemed to finally sense the tension. Ah, have we committed some kind of faux pas? My apologies if we violated protocol. We're new to the whole interstellar diplomacy thing. Silence! The Supreme Leader roared, his voice back to maximum intimidation level. Guards, bring these creatures to me. I will size them up personally before deciding on an appropriately lengthy method of execution. A squad of elite guards immediately moved toward the observation gallery. But to everyone's surprise, the humans made no attempt to flee or resist. Instead, they calmly waited for the guards to escort them down to the main floor, maintaining their relaxed demeanor even as they were brought before the most feared being in the galaxy. Zorn wanted to close his eyes, but protocol demanded he witness every moment of this disaster. His career was in ruins. But perhaps he could learn from whatever horrible fate awaited these foolish humans. Supreme Leader Drathar loomed over the three humans, his central eye pulsing hypnotically. You have committed 63 violations of Dominion Protocol. The standard punishment is molecular disassembly, preceded by 3 cycles of educational torture. Wow, harsh, Lieutenant Sanchez commented, seemingly unfazed. Is there maybe a fine we could pay instead? Points on our license? The Supreme Leader's normal eyes narrowed. You do not seem appropriately terrified. Well, Captain Brenner said reasonably, it's a bit difficult to be terrified when the whole setup is so deliberate. I mean, the fog machines, the voice modulator, the scary music, it's all very impressive production value, don't get me wrong. But where we come from, this kind of thing is entertainment. A ripple of astonished murmurs ran through the assembly. Entertainment. The Supreme Leader's sacred intimidation rituals? You find the symbols of my absolute power entertaining? Drathar asked, genuinely puzzled for perhaps the first time in millennia. It's not that we don't respect your authority, Dr. Priyakumar interjected diplomatically. It's simply that on Earth, these particular symbols, artificial fog, deepened voices, dramatic lighting, are associated with theatrical performances rather than genuine displays of power. I see, the Supreme Leader said, though he clearly didn't. And what, may I ask, do your kind find intimidating? The three humans exchanged glances. Honestly, Captain Brenner shrugged. Tax audits, maybe public speaking, the thought that we might be alone in the universe, though I guess we can cross that one off the list now. You fear tax collection? Drathar asked incredulously. And commitment, Lieutenant Sanchez added. Don't forget, commitment issues. The Supreme Leader's central eye pulsed rapidly, as if trying to process this incomprehensible information. Enough of this nonsense. You will tell me the true defensive capabilities of your world, the location of your primary military installations, and the composition of your ruling council before I feed you to the void beasts. Captain Brenner's relaxed demeanor suddenly shifted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unremarkable device. I was hoping we could keep this friendly, but since you're going straight to threats, he held up the device. This transmitter is linked to a database containing everything we've observed about your operation here. If anything happens to us, it automatically broadcasts to every intelligent species within 50 light-years. It was a bluff. Of course, Zorn could tell immediately the device was likely nothing more than some primitive Earth technology, possibly not even functional. But the way Captain Brenner held it, the sudden seriousness in his previously jovial expression, it created just enough doubt. The Supreme Leader hesitated, his central eye dimming slightly. You expect me to believe that your primitive species possesses technology capable of such transmission? How do you think we found this place? Captain Brenner countered. How do you think we bypassed your security so easily? We may be new to the galactic stage, but we've been observing for longer than you realize. Another bluff. Zorn was certain. And yet, they had indeed bypassed the Dominion's supposedly impenetrable security with disturbing ease. An uncomfortable silence fell over the grand audience chamber, 10,000 cycles of absolute rule through fear, and suddenly the Supreme Leader found himself in an unexpected standoff with 3 unarmed aliens who refused to be intimidated. It was Dr. Priyakumar who finally broke the silence. Perhaps we could suggest an alternative approach. Rather than threats of violence or broadcasting secrets, we could engage in cultural exchange, We are genuinely interested in learning about the quantum dominion, and we have much to share about Earth. Cultural exchange? The Supreme Leader seemed to taste the unfamiliar concept. What could your species possibly have that would interest the Dominion? Lieutenant Sanchez held up the bottle he'd been carrying since their arrival. For starters, whiskey and jazz. Ever heard jazz? Changed my life. What is this? Jazz? Asked a delegate from the back of the room, immediately covering his mouth in horror at having spoken without permission. But strangely, the Supreme Leader didn't immediately vaporize the speaker. He seemed distracted, genuinely curious despite himself. Yes, explain this jazz and whiskey. And so began the most bizarre diplomatic encounter in the history of the Quantum Dominion. The humans produced a small device that played music, complex, unpredictable sounds unlike anything in the Dominion's carefully regulated artistic expression. Lieutenant Sanchez poured small amounts of the amber liquid into cups for those brave enough to try it. Zorn watched in disbelief as the ominous background music was turned off for the first time in living memory, replaced by this jazz, even more shocking. Supreme Leader Drathar himself accepted a cup of the earth beverage, his massive armored hand looking strangely incongruous, holding the tiny container. You see, Captain Brenner explained as the jazz played and the whiskey was cautiously sampled. On Earth, we've found that shared experiences, music, food, drink, build stronger bonds than intimidation ever could. But how do you maintain order without fear? The Supreme Leader asked, genuinely perplexed. How do you prevent rebellion? Oh, we have plenty of rebellion. Dr. Priyakumar laughed. Constant rebellion. In fact, we call it democracy, the orderly transfer of power through structured disagreement. It's messy, inefficient, and absolutely essential to our way of life. Structured disagreement, the Supreme Leader repeated, as if trying to grasp an utterly alien concept. And this prevents war. Not always, Captain Brenner admitted. We've had our share of conflicts, but we've found that cultures that permit internal dissent are actually more stable in the long run than those that suppress it. The pressure finds release in small, manageable ways rather than building to catastrophic failure. As the conversation continued, Zorn noticed something extraordinary happening throughout the chamber. Delegates who had spent centuries in rigid silence were cautiously beginning to speak, asking questions about Earth, about jazz, about democracy. The fog was gradually dispersing as ventilation systems were adjusted for comfort rather than intimidation. The Supreme Leader himself had taken a seat, an unprecedented act that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. You mentioned art, Supreme Leader Drathar said to Dr. Priyakumar. What forms does Earth art take? As many forms as there are humans, she replied. Painting, sculpture, music, dance, literature, digital creations, architecture, creative expression is considered a fundamental aspect of our humanity. We had sculptures once, the Supreme Leader said quietly, and the entire chamber fell silent at this unexpected personal revelation. Before my ascension, the Dominion created beautiful representations of flying creatures. Birds, we called them. You don't anymore? Lieutenant Sanchez asked. I discourage such frivolous pursuits, Drathar admitted. They seemed inefficient, without practical purpose. Purpose? Captain Brenner smiled. The purpose of art isn't practical. It's to remind us of beauty, to challenge us, to preserve our cultural memory across generations. Cultural memory, the Supreme Leader repeated thoughtfully. We have historical records, of course, but they are primarily tactical analyses, technological achievements. But where are your stories? Dr. Priyakumar asked gently. Your myths, your music, your collective dreams. A strange silence fell over the assembly as this question resonated through the chamber. Zorn felt something shifting in the atmosphere, Not just the literal clearing of the ceremonial fog, but something deeper, as if foundations that had stood for 10 millennia were subtly realigning. "What I find most interesting," Captain Brenner said into the silence, "is how quickly humor bridged our differences. When I commented on the fog machines, there was genuine laughter in this room. When was the last time anyone here laughed freely?" No one answered. Laughter, like all spontaneous expressions, had long been regulated within the Dominion, permitted only during designated amusement periods and then only at approved humorous content. "Humor is a survival mechanism for us," Lieutenant Sanchez explained. "When times are darkest, when fear is greatest, humans often turn to laughter as defiance, as connection, as hope." "Laughter as defiance," the Supreme Leader mused, his central eye pulsing slowly now, thoughtfully. "I have always viewed laughter as weakness, as failure to comprehend the seriousness of existence." "With respect," Dr. Priyakumar said, "perhaps it's the opposite. Perhaps laughter is the acknowledgement that existence is so serious, so precious, that we must find joy in it despite everything." The Supreme Leader was silent for a long moment. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, he reached up and deactivated his voice modulator. When he spoke again, his voice was higher, less resonant, the natural voice of his species, unheard in public for thousands of cycles. "I believe," he said in this new, authentic voice, "that we have much to learn from Earth." A collective gasp went through the assembly, followed by something unprecedented, a spontaneous round of applause. It began hesitantly, then grew, spreading through the chamber until thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds were joining in this strange, forbidden expression of approval. And Supreme Leader Drathar, absolute ruler of the Quantum Dominion for 10,000 cycles, did not punish them for it. Instead, he issued a series of commands that would forever change the course of galactic history. "Deactivate the fog machines, permanently. Restore the bird sculptures to the Central Plaza. Establish a cultural exchange program with Earth, effective immediately." And then, most shocking of all, Zorn Vex, approach. Zorn stepped forward, certain that despite everything, he was about to be punished for his role in this protocol disaster. He prostrated himself automatically before the Supreme Leader. "Rise, Zorn Vex," Drathar said, still using his natural voice. "You will no longer be required to prostrate yourself in my presence. In fact," he looked around the chamber, "no one will. This practice is hereby discontinued." Zorn rose shakily to his feet, unable to process what was happening. "Supreme Leader, I must apologize for my failure to properly contain and process the Earth delegation." "On the contrary," Drathar interrupted, "you have inadvertently facilitated the most significant diplomatic breakthrough in the history of the Dominion. Henceforth, you will serve as primary liaison between our civilization and Earth, with the rank of ambassador rather than attaché." "Ambassador," Zorn repeated weakly. "But I have violated protocols." "The protocols," Supreme Leader Drathar said firmly, "are changing as of today." Over the following days, the Quantum Dominion experienced more changes than it had in the previous 10 millennia combined. The intimidation music was replaced with rotating selections from various cultures, including Earth's jazz. The ceremonial armor of office was redesigned to emphasize craftsmanship rather than fear. Most significantly, a historic alliance treaty was drafted, not a subjugation agreement as had been the Dominion's practice for thousands of cycles, but a genuine partnership that recognized Earth as an equal. Throughout these negotiations, Zorn Vex found himself increasingly drawn to the humans' perspective. Their casual disregard for hierarchy and protocol still occasionally made him twitch, but he began to see the value in their approach, the creativity it fostered, the genuine connections it built. On the final day of negotiations, as the treaty was prepared for signing, Zorn found Captain Brenner alone on one of the observation balconies, looking out at the sprawling Dominion capital. "Captain," Zorn greeted him, still uncomfortable with the human preference for first names. "The Supreme Leader is ready to sign the treaty." "Great." Brenner nodded, then gestured to the view. "Quite a place you've got here. Hard to believe we almost ended up as void beast food." "Indeed," Zorn agreed dryly. "Though I feel compelled to point out that there are no such things as void beasts. That was merely a traditional intimidation technique." And then, to his own surprise, Zorn found himself doing something he had never done before in his 342 cycles of existence. He smiled. It felt strange, the unfamiliar muscles pulling at his face, but not unpleasant. Captain Brenner noticed immediately. "Well, look at that. Ambassador Vex can smile after all. It seems I have much to learn about cultural exchange myself," Zorn admitted. "That's the spirit." Brenner clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture Zorn was gradually becoming accustomed to. "So, when are you going to visit Earth? You'd love it. Some parts are even more protocol-obsessed than you are." "I would be interested in such a visit," Zorn said carefully. "Though I confess the idea of a world where leadership changes regularly through this democracy process is still difficult to comprehend. Trust me, we barely comprehend it ourselves sometimes." Brenner laughed. "But it works, more or less. Keeps things interesting. At least, interesting," Zorn repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I believe the Dominion could benefit from being more interesting together." They walked back to the grand audience chamber, where Supreme Leader Drathar, now using his natural voice exclusively and dressed in simpler attire that still managed to convey dignity without relying on intimidation, waited to sign the historic treaty. As the Supreme Leader's hand hovered over the document, he paused and looked at the three humans who had changed everything. "Before I sign, I must ask, how did you know?" "Know what?" Lieutenant Sanchez asked. "That laughter would be the key. That your irreverence would succeed where 10,000 cycles of diplomacy, warfare, and subjugation had established predictable patterns." Dr. Priyakumar smiled. "We didn't know. We simply behaved as ourselves, bringing our humanity, with all its flaws and contradictions, to the encounter. Humor is our natural response to tension, to the unknown." "Then perhaps," the Supreme Leader said, signing the treaty with a flourish, "it is time for the Dominion to learn how to laugh." And so it was that the most feared empire in galactic history began its transformation, not through revolution or war, but through jazz and whiskey and the simple, radical act of laughing in the face of fear. The bird sculptures returned to the central plaza, their wings spread wide as if in flight. The fog machines were repurposed for actual climate control rather than intimidation. And throughout the vast reaches of the Quantum Dominion, beings who had lived for millennia in carefully regulated terror began to discover the revolutionary power of smiling at authority. Zorn Vex, newly appointed ambassador to Earth, found himself at the center of this transformation. The protocol manuals he had memorized were being rewritten, the hierarchies reorganized, the very foundations of Dominion society reconfigured. And strangely, he didn't mind at all. On his final evening before departing for his first official visit to Earth, Zorn stood alone in the now quiet grand audience chamber. The ominous music was gone. The fog dispersed, the harsh lighting replaced with a gentler illumination that highlighted the chamber's genuine architectural beauty rather than its intimidating scale. "Quite a change, isn't it?" a voice said behind him. Zorn turned to find Supreme Leader Drathar, or simply Leader Drathar, as he now preferred to be called, entering the chamber. "Indeed. Supreme Leader," Zorn said, still stumbling occasionally over the simplified title. "Though I find I am adapting more easily than anticipated." As am I, Drathar admitted, coming to stand beside his ambassador. After 10,000 cycles of rule through fear, I expected to feel diminished by these changes. Instead, I feel lighter, as if I had been carrying the weight of all that artificial dread myself. The humans have an expression, Zorn said. Laughter is the best medicine. So I've heard. Drathar nodded. I've been studying their literature, their films, their music. Such variety, such contradictions, and yet it all somehow forms a coherent whole. Their strength seems to lie in their diversity rather than their uniformity. Zorn observed, a concept alien to Dominion philosophy until now. Yes, Drathar agreed. And yet, perhaps not entirely alien. He gestured around the chamber. Look at this architecture, the flying buttresses, the vaulted ceilings. Even at the height of our intimidation protocols, we created beauty alongside fear. Perhaps some part of us always remembered the birds. Zorn looked up at the soaring ceiling, seeing it with new eyes. I never considered it that way. Protocol dictated that we focus on the intimidation aspects rather than the aesthetic ones. Protocol. Drathar sighed. So much of our society has been built on rigid adherence to rules established millennia ago, their original purpose long forgotten. Change is uncomfortable, Zorn admitted, but not unwelcome. No, Drathar agreed. Not unwelcome at all. He turned to face his ambassador directly. You will represent us well on Earth. Zorn Vex. Your dedication to protocol has given you a thorough understanding of our society. While your recent experiences with the humans have opened your mind to new possibilities, you stand at the intersection of what we were and what we might become. Zorn felt a strange warmth at these words. Pride. But different from the cold satisfaction of perfect protocol adherence he had previously known. This was something more personal, more genuine. I will do my best to honor both traditions, he promised. I know you will, Drathar said. Then, with a hint of mischief that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier, he added, just don't let them convince you to try karaoke. I've been researching Earth entertainment, and that particular custom seems potentially hazardous to diplomatic relations. And Zorn Vex, senior diplomatic attaché turned ambassador, protocol master turned cultural pioneer, did something that would have been unimaginable before the humans arrived. He laughed. Not a careful, regulated chuckle during a designated amusement period, but a genuine, spontaneous laugh that echoed through the vast chamber, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings and reverberating through the space where fog and fear had once reigned supreme. And in that moment, as his laughter mingled with Drathar's, Zorn understood what the humans had been trying to tell them all along. True power lay not in creating fear, but in the courage to overcome it, not in rigid adherence to ancient protocols, but in the flexibility to create new ones, not in the uniformity of subjugation, but in the beautiful, chaotic diversity of connection. As his laughter subsided, Zorn looked up once more at the soaring architecture above them. Yes, he could see it now. The echo of birds in flight, preserved in stone and metal even when the actual sculptures had been banned. Some truths were too fundamental to be completely erased, no matter how many cycles of repression had passed. Ambassador Vex, Drathar said, using the formal title with a warmth that transformed it from a designation of rank to a genuine expression of respect. I believe the Quantum Dominion is ready to join the galactic community, not as conquerors, but as partners, as equals. Zorn agreed, still marveling at how natural such a revolutionary concept now seemed. As equals, Drathar confirmed. Thanks to 3 humans who had the audacity to laugh in the face of the most feared being in the galaxy. In your face, Zorn corrected gently. Yes. Drathar smiled, another expression that was becoming more natural with practice. In my face indeed, The most revolutionary act in 10,000 cycles, and not a weapon in sight. As Zorn prepared to depart for Earth the next morning, he packed lightly, one small bag containing only the essentials and a single cultural artifact he had requested special permission to bring. A small bird sculpture, recently recreated from ancient designs found in the archives. Captain Brenner met him at the docking bay, grinning at the sight of the former protocol master now dressed in the simplified diplomatic attire that had replaced the intimidation spikes and rank manifestations of old. "Looking good, Ambassador," the human approved. "Ready for your first trip to Earth?" "I believe so," Zorn said, still a touch formally despite weeks of exposure to human casualness. "Though I confess to some apprehension about experiencing your democracy firsthand." "Don't worry," Brenner laughed. "We'll start you off easy. No election years or tax season for your first visit." As they boarded the Earth vessel, the same battered but surprisingly capable serendipity that had started it all, Zorn cast one last look back at the Dominion headquarters. Already, the architecture was being modified, the harsh angles softened, the intimidating scale complemented by more welcoming elements. Workers were installing the first of many bird sculptures in the plaza, their wings spread wide in eternal flight. "Quite a change," Captain Brenner observed, following his gaze. "Yes," Zorn agreed. "Though the Supreme Leader, forgive me, Leader Drathar, says it is less a change than a remembering, a return to aspects of ourselves long suppressed." "I like that." Brenner nodded approvingly. "Remembering, rather than changing, makes the transition easier, I'd imagine." "Indeed," Zorn said, "though I suspect Earth will present changes too fundamental to be classified as mere remembering." "Probably," Brenner admitted cheerfully. "Fair warning, it's chaotic, contradictory, and occasionally completely nonsensical. But it's home, and we're pretty fond of it." "I look forward to experiencing it," Zorn said, and realized with some surprise that he truly meant it. The apprehension was still there, but alongside it was something new: excitement, curiosity, even a touch of the irreverence that had so characterized the human's approach to the Dominion. As the Serendipity's engines hummed to life and the vast Dominion headquarters receded from view, Zorn found himself thinking not of protocols and hierarchies, but of birds in flight, of jazz and whiskey and spontaneous laughter, of the strange, transformative power of refusing to be afraid. The ship accelerated, the stars blurred into streaks of light, and the quantum dominion, or what it had once been, fell away behind them. Ahead lay Earth, with all its chaotic democracy and structured disagreement and bewildering variety. And Zorn Vex, ambassador of a changing empire, found himself smiling once again as they hurtled toward the planet where humans had learned the most revolutionary truth in the galaxy, that sometimes the most powerful response to fear was simply to laugh in its face.